Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Sorry for the technical delays on this one. We had to do a bit of a different technical setup this week. So thank you for joining the call. This is our November live stream. We got some quick recap of what we've been working on the past few weeks and what we're going to be working on in the next few weeks, and a couple exciting announcements that we're making. You all are going to be the first to be privy to those announcements. We're not going to make them public for probably another 2 to 3 weeks. So get excited. Then once we've gone through my usual presentation, we'll jump into questions. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the questions channel in Discord. If you want to chat about anything, post it in the chat channel. And if anything that I talk about during the presentation strikes your interest, then definitely feel free to ask about them. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Great. All right, so past 4 weeks, we have been working on a ton of stuff. The Korean deck launched. We have also added login to the website. So one of the things I talked about last month was that we were going to try and turn the website into a web application where people can come and start to do interactive things like track their progress and pretty much anything that you could want. So we took the first major step towards that. We've also been working on partnerships with other influencers, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but this is something that's been an idea that's been bouncing around for a while, and we're excited to announce that we're actually finally going to be launching this. The other big thing that we've been working on, as part of the French deck, we have been trying to automate as much of the deck creation process as possible, and we took another big step this month towards doing that. So ongoing projects, the French deck is still in progress. We are at the stage of actually recording the audio and doing the final sorting. So the deck is basically almost ready. We're just waiting for the native audio to be ready. The QA search v2 got delayed due to some issues with our developers, but it is back on track. We should be merging it today or early next week. We put the quick start guides on hold for a minute. We wanted to get the technology set, and then once the technology is in place, we're going to get back into content, and we'll be doing a big content push after the Thanksgiving break. So yeah, the Korean deck, we shipped that this past month. So a big thank you to Cloudy Howdy and Katrina for their hard work on the deck. And the Boundless team was the team that actually recorded the audio, and Boundless is a tool. They're working to create essentially graded listeners. So creating interesting, compelling podcasts that can help early learners in stage 1 and early stage 2 find interesting audio content. So we are excited to be working with them, and we thank you for their work on the Korean deck. As mentioned, we have added login to the site. So this may seem like a very small thing, but it's actually quite a large step in terms of being able to provide interesting features and tools and centralizing all user engagement onto the website. So now if you want to join the community, rather than giving us your email, you just log in and we have the invite link right there. So the big announcement that we're going to make that is we're not going to make publicly until next month is that we are partnering with 2 new YouTubers. Many of you are probably familiar with Lamont from Days of French and Swedish, but some of you may not be as familiar with Mr. Salas. He is another YouTuber, so I'm going to talk about each of them individually, but we are working to bring them in as essentially new maps for different languages. So Lamont, his native language is Australian English, and he also speaks Swedish, obviously, at a very high level, and he's working on French. He has a YouTube sub count at around 50K, and he's actually been working on the French deck with us. So him and one of the moderators from the French community have been working together to do all of the French review prior to handing it off to the native speaker. So we're very excited about him joining the team. He's great. He's a straight shooter in an otherwise in a community that is otherwise filled with a lot of charlatans who lie about what they can do. He's just a very straight shooter, is always very honest, and is very well respected in the community. Mr. Salas, he is a native Spanish speaker. He's learned several languages to differing levels of proficiency. He's a big proponent of the immersion and the input hypothesis. And so with his help, we are going to branch out into the Spanish language community. So far, all of our content has been in English, and the next step is to start creating content and tools for Spanish speakers. So for example, we're going to create an English deck specifically for Spanish speakers, and then we're going to have to create that same deck for different other languages, but this is our first attempt at breaking into a new community and a new area of the language learning world that has so far been sort of out of bounds for us, just because it's been very difficult for us to write content for other languages. So all in all, with Matt, Mr. Salas, and Lamont, our total YouTube subs is up around, I think, 400,000. So this is definitely going to expand our reach to new communities and new markets, and hopefully expand our community as well. So over the next 4 weeks, we're going to launch QA Search, as I mentioned. We're going to launch the French deck. We are also going to be hosting our 1-year anniversary party. So we have been around for almost a year now, which is amazing and shocking. And I'm very excited by everything that we've done in the past year and everything that we're going to do in the next year. So I'm going to talk about when that is in a bit. And then we are also getting into a couple of new projects around trying to access that Spanish market. And so part of that is creating tools and guides for them, but the other part is getting the translations up on the website. So we're going to be starting to build the infrastructure that's necessary for us to support multiple languages on the website. So as I mentioned, anniversary party. So we are currently scheduled for December 6th. The time is a little bit less determined right now. I'm going to figure that out today. But we're going to be doing interviews with Matt, Lamont, and Mr. Salas. We're going to be doing Q&As with them. And then we also have some awesome raffles and prizes that we're going to be raffling off to the community. So look out for more information about that coming soon. And then, as mentioned, if you weren't on the call last time, this is what the QA Search V2 feature is going to be. We already have QA Search V1. V2 is going to be all community Q&As and whatnot. We've uploaded all of that information, but now we just need to do a final test on the filtering logic, and then it should be good to go. So I think that is everything that I had to present. So if you have any questions about anything that is going on behind the scenes, feel free to put it in the chat and we will answer it. Otherwise, I'm going to stop presenting. Okay. So jumping into Discord. First question, J. Mig Carrier. Question, I am considering preferring audio vocab and audio sentence cards over text cards to have an audio first memory of new vocab that I would later attach to the written form rather than the other way around. Does this idea make any sense, or do you think the cons of these formats are too strong to make this worthwhile?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. I mean, if you have a good technical setup to make the cards like that, I mean, that would be the only potential sticking point. But yeah, I mean, I think that sounds like a good idea. Wait, did the person specify if they're going to put individual words on the front or sentence cards or sentences on the front?
They said both. For both vocab and sentence cards, they would use audio.
So they're going to make separate. They're going to make some cards as vocab cards and some cards as sentence cards.
Looks like it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense to me. I mean, it might be more challenging if you're listening ability isn't very high yet. But if you don't run into that issue of them being excessively more challenging, then I think that makes sense. And in general, it's not very hard to learn how to read something if you can already hear it. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
the
if you're
only
more
downside of
focused on
audio
listening
cards is
ability. Or
yeah, the
sorry,
only
go ahead.
downside of audio cards is the technical process of creating them. But if you have a good technical setup, then I think generally audio cards are better, just because it allows you to develop that listening ability. Cool. Thanks for the question. The Hound 545 is asking, I find it easier to watch television in my TL if I don't have the TL subtitles going on in the background. I find it extremely difficult to keep up when I'm trying to decipher the words. Am I hindering my ability to understand my TL when I do that, or does it not matter all that much?
I mean, it kind of depends on your overall strategy. Most people find it a lot harder to learn new words through listening alone because in order to be able to look them up, you have to hear them perfectly first of all. And it's not possible to use things like pop-up dictionaries and stuff like that. Like you'd have to go and like manually type it out in most situations. In which case, it's harder to learn new words and it's harder to sentence bind that way. So that's like the real issue. But I mean, if you feel like you can pick up new words really like pretty naturally just through listening, then there's no real problem with that, I would say. Most people find the opposite to be true. They find it much easier to understand and much easier to immerse when they do have the subs on. And so that's why we recommend. But if you find that that's not the case for you, then yeah, there's no reason why it's like that crucial to use subtitles.
Great, thanks for the question. Josh is asking, how is my Spanish going? It's a great question. Um, Unfortunately, I don't get as much time to spend on it as I would like, just because I am so busy with Refold. I end up getting probably 1 to 2 hours of passive listening per day in the form of podcasts or audiobooks, just while I'm walking the dog or making dinner and things like that. But as far as active immersion goes, I probably only get about 5 hours per week, which is much less than I would like. And so what that means is I have to be very strategic about how I use that time. And so I've gotten into a rhythm of essentially choosing like one type of active immersion per week. So, 1 week it would be working with an italki tutor, and the next week it would be working on shadowing, or the next week it would be working on, sentence mining from a TV show. And I found that working okay. It's not I don't think it's as good as if I were like really engaged with it constantly, but I am still making progress. As far as my actual progress goes, I got to a point when I moved up to 3A where I tried shadowing for the first time, and I realized that I actually couldn't hear a lot of the words, even though I could understand what people were saying. I was missing a lot of the particles. And so I actually did a big listening deep dive at that point to try and improve my listening ability, which worked quite well. And then once I had that, I tried shadowing again, and my mouth just couldn't keep up. So I've actually started doing reading audiobooks and listening, or reading books and listening to the audiobook at the same time, reading it aloud rather. So just to get my mouth in that rhythm of speaking Spanish. And then in addition to that, I've been writing. I have a friend who I'm texting with, and then I have an italki tutor who's been great. We have a setup where she just sends me a list of questions, and I do writing, or I just write answers to all those questions, and then we go through every correction of the answers that I list. And so that's been really helpful for developing the writing ability. I think my next step is I'm going to try to do even longer form writing, like reading a Wikipedia article and then trying to summarize it in Spanish, as a way to continue to sort of loosen the flow of words. I definitely find myself in the position where I am on that sort of, I never feel ready for output. It's something we talk about in the guide. There's a lot of people who get input forever and then never feel ready. And like, I'm one of those people. So I need to strategically use writing and correction as my way to break through that. So I'm still working on breaking through that, but things are going really well otherwise, given the amount of time that I can reasonably spend on it. Thanks for the question. Blue Newt is asking, Matt has said that the most ideal situation to acquire a language is to have a group of friends that speak your TL while not being forced to output. Because when you feel your social in-group speaks your TL, it gives you the most subconscious motivation to acquire it. Do you think it would be feasible to replicate this experience with something like VR chat or Discord voice chat?
Sorry, the connection kind of broke up a little bit. I didn't hear the full question.
Okay. The summary of the question is it feasible to replicate a social crosstalk group via VR chat or Discord chat in order to get the social benefits and the social reinforcement that the TL is important for your brain?
Yeah, I definitely think it would be possible. Something to consider is that ideally you would be looking at real human faces because that's a huge part of social interaction. I think when you're only hearing someone's voice and you're not seeing their actual face and their facial expressions and the look in their eyes, then you're only getting access to part of your social brain, not the entire thing. And so to get the maximum benefit of the unconscious motivation of feeling like you need to learn a language in order to fit into your social group, I think ideally you'd be in a situation where you're looking at people's faces. So, VChat wouldn't really be good for that. But in Discord, sometimes people show their face in video calls and stuff. I've been in some Japanese Discord servers where people do that. There's kind of just there's servers where people just go to hang out with other random people and have conversations about random stuff, and they will sometimes like show your face, and so that type of thing would be pretty good. And there used to be websites back in the day. I don't know if they're how used they are anymore, but there are websites where Japanese people do kind of the same thing for Skype. It's just like it's kind of like Omegle, but a little bit more long term, where people would just say, "Hey, I'm this random guy. Add me on Skype," and then you could go and talk to them. And sometimes they do groups of like 10 people that all just be on a giant Skype call talking about random stuff. And so that type of thing, I actually think, yeah, would potentially be pretty good for this. So I think if you get creative, there's definitely potential to kind of replicate that. And also you don't have to go for perfection. I think if you had like some kind of combination of like you had some situation where you're like playing video games with other Japanese people, and then maybe you have like one-on-one sessions with like someone you met on Hello Talk, and so you got like sometime one-on-one looking at someone's face sometimes, or maybe you don't see the face but you're with multiple people, you could still get like 80% of the benefits even if you don't have like the a technically perfect environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be great to set up recurring cross-talk groups within the community at some point, just in order to, because there are some languages where we do have a lot of natives, and I think given that we're all sort of in the same boat together, even though they're learning different languages, it would be good to do that. And we did that a bunch in the Spanish server for a while, for a couple months. We were doing crosstalk sessions every week or so, and that actually was really great, but it died off because we didn't have anybody sort of leading the charge on that. It was sort of just some people were interested in doing it. So we'd love to make that more a part of our Discord community and our Refold community, just doing that kind of experience.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of potential there.
Great, thank you for the question. Cameron is asking, when immersing in a show that is very compelling, I often will notice that a significant amount of time has passed and I don't remember hearing the Japanese. Rather, I am just in the next location of the show. I feel like this is the state that Matt speaks about being ideal. I am 2C and I understand a large amount of words in SOL content. The following questions don't occur with TL subs, just with pure listening. Question, is it worthwhile to be in that state even though I'm not actually consciously hearing the Japanese? Am I taking in information that is only nonverbal? Should I be internalizing every single word, or just okay with knowing that I'm following along with the story, nonverbal or not?
I mean, yeah, I think like you mentioned, that when you're in that state of you're not even thinking of, you forget that it's even in a foreign language. You just feel like you're receiving a message and you're completely in a flow state around that, that's probably the ideal situation for acquisition. And in that sense, there's the way I would interpret that is that you're having this really streamlined back and forth between your unconscious and unconscious mind, where you're pretty much letting your unconscious totally focus on the language, and you're just focused on the message. And so I think that if you can get into that state, then you should just spend as much time in that state as possible until you get to basically like mm, basically, yeah, until you get to level 6 comprehension, basically, because I think that state can take you all the way to level 6 comprehension. And it's once you kind of max out your comprehension, yet when you output, there's still things that you're missing. That's when you need to kind of take language and put it back into consciousness to try to find as much to find the things that you missed, because there will be things that your brain just doesn't pick up completely on its own. But the way that I think about it is generally first let your brain pick up everything it'll pick up on its own, and then you go and pick up all the little gaps that it missed. And in terms of your brain picking things up on its own for you, being in that flow state is the ideal state. So I would say spend as much time in that for now until you completely max out all the benefits you get from just pure immersion, and then worry about consciously picking up things that you missed. And you'll know what things you missed because they'll show up as problems with your output. So when you output, you get feedback from native speakers about what you're missing, whether that's a grammar thing or pronunciation thing or a vocab thing, and then you want to start consciously paying attention to those in your input.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add to this is that I also got to that state with a couple different shows in 2C. And then when I actually got into 3A and started shadowing, that was when I sort of realized that I wasn't actually hearing all the words, because I do think it's possible to fully understand something without actually hearing all the particles and things in it. And so there's sort of a next level of noticing that is going to hit you when you get into that 3A level. That was just my experience when I went through that. So just be aware that that is likely going to happen to you as well.
But I think another thing to keep in mind is that it's not like when you enter that flow state that now, okay, you've now mastered comprehension. It's like you have to have a certain level of comprehension to be able to access that flow state. And once you're in the flow state, learning continues to happen, perhaps extremely efficiently, although you're not experiencing it. And that's what's always happening in our native language, right? Like, I think if you actually pay attention, I notice myself using words that I've never used before for the first time pretty frequently. And I'll notice myself picking up new words. Like I'll say a word, I'll be like, I don't even think I this word just came out of my mouth naturally. I don't even think I knew this last year. So clearly I'm picking up new words in English all the time, even though I'm almost always in this flow state and never consciously paying attention to the language. So perhaps if you know, in your case, Ethan, if you would have spent another 100 hours or something in that flow state, then when you moved on to 3A, you wouldn't. It would have been easier to repeat the sounds. Maybe.
Maybe. I mean, I think the issue isn't, because you're right. Like there are definitely like words that I hear. I'm like, oh, that word. Like I'm like learning it through that flow state. But it's more the smaller grammar particle things that I'm missing when I try to output or shadow. Um, just because there's so many minor grammar things in Spanish where you don't actually need to notice the difference between two different conjugations, because you can understand the
Hmm.
sentiment between them, and the meaning between them. And it wasn't until I actually tried to reproduce it that I noticed that I was actually just merging these two things in my head and not separating them.
Yeah. Well, I think in that case, there's two different things that could be happening, and it's hard to tell which one it is. One is that kind of Stephen Krashen talks about there being a natural order to acquisition, where his original hypothesis was that no matter what your first language is, when you acquire a given language naturally, you're going to acquire the different grammatical structures in that language in a fixed order. And you can, and this is independent of whatever you've consciously studied or what you consciously are paying attention to. And I think this has been shown to not actually be fully true. Depending on what your native language is, that's going to change the order, and probably what you pay attention to and what you learn also changes the order. But I still think there's this idea of, in order to, there's certain things that they're only acquired after everything else is already in place. This is kind of like the persistent puzzles idea. And so there's some things that maybe you would acquire them naturally. You just need a little more time, because those are, it just so happens that those things end up being the last few missing pieces. But at the same time, there are other things that you will just never acquire unless you have some kind of conscious intervention. And I think pitch accent is an example of this for Japanese, where it just seems like people can get infinite immersion and they don't acquire, a lot of people never acquire pitch accent. So it's hard to say which one it is, because if it's one of those things like pitch accent, then it's like, yeah, you might as well consciously intervene at an earlier stage. Why put it off? Because the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to have the intervention. But on the other end, if you're going to end up acquiring naturally, then why not just let it happen naturally and save yourself some effort? So in general, the way I try to separate these two is just look at learners of that language who share your native language and see what their results are. So like in Japanese, when you look at longtime learners of the language who have taken like an immersion approach, generally they don't struggle with grammar, but they do struggle with pitch accent. So you can interpret that as, okay, I probably won't have to have conscious intervention for grammar, but I will for pitch accent. So that's one framework, but of course everyone's, different, so you can't rely on that 100%.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Thanks, Cameron, for the question. Schweiner is asking, if you would move to a country with a native language which you don't speak, but you want to partially for making life there easier and partly out of interest, then say you have a second language that you would want to learn, which comes up naturally in your daily life due to content that you are into, what would you do in this case, since both languages naturally come up in daily life for immersion? Would you just learn both? If so, how would you go about it?
I
So,
mean, personally, I would pick one to learn, because it's so much more efficient to learn one language at a time rather than multiple. And which language to pick completely depends on the particular situation. I would make that decision based on my future plans. How long was I going to live in that country? Was I going to live there the rest of my life, or is this just a temporary thing? How relevant is that language to, uh, my personal interests and the world at large and all these things? And just personally, like, well, where are your passions pointing you? Because at the end of the day, you need passion to really get good at a language, because it's just such a long process. It requires so much dedication. So it's totally up to you which you would pick, but I would pick one at a time. It's not like one forever, but I would learn one at a time. And there are people, like, for example, I think um, there was one point where Yoga was actually living in China, but mostly just studying Japanese all day, because he went to China, I think, thinking he could learn both at the same time, realized that wasn't going to be realistic, and decided that Japanese was the one he wanted to learn first. And so he just like studied Japanese for a year in China and didn't learn Chinese, and he made it work. So that's definitely an option, even though it might sound a little weird. It totally depends on your personal priorities and situation.
yeah, and just to add to that, if the only reason you want to speak the native language of that country is just to make life easier, then language hacking is probably the right approach, just to get to a very fast level of conversation, or very quickly get to a point where you can converse in daily life. Um, like with language hacking, in 3 months, you can be having basic conversations with people without too much trouble, depending on the language, of course. Um, so that might be another way to sort of optimize this, like use the immersion approach for the language you actually want to learn to fluency, but for one that you're okay with just having like basic survival conversation, do the language hacking approach just to balance the two out. Thanks for the question. Second question, when you immersed with anime and any other material, did you end up not enjoying it anymore by the time you got finished? Did you burn out on it? If so, did you regret immersing with this kind of material instead of keeping it for when you can understand 100% and appreciate it without having to use dictionary or having parts of it that you couldn't understand?
Um, so are they like talking about specific shows? Like at first, I thought
Uh,
they were talking about anime as in general, and then it sounded like they actually just meant specific shows.
I think it means specific shows, though you could extrapolate it to genres.
Um, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, for me personally, I never really felt that way because even from relatively early on, the experience of watching an anime in the original, even if I didn't understand it, was still very exciting to me. It felt um, for me, I was happy to just be touching the real thing, even if I didn't get it. That still felt it had this kind of cool magic to it. I'd be happy if I even if I just understood one little thing here or there. I also was doing this thing that I wouldn't recommend, where I kind of bullshitted myself about how much I was understanding, and I'd kind of just like pretend I was understanding more and make up what they were saying and be like, "Oh, they said this, right? Oh yeah, I understood that," and stuff like that. And I remember, like, being really moved by anime that I, in hindsight, clearly didn't even understand, so, I guess for me, it wasn't really an issue, and I've also had the experience of, like, going like, becoming fluent and then going back and watching things I watched at the beginning, and it pretty much being like I'd never seen it before because I understood so much more than I did at the beginning. And so ultimately, I don't really have a very strong sense that I like ruined any shows, but at the same time, I think there definitely are shows that you can never really have the first experience of watching something for the first time besides the very first time you watch it. And so there are shows that probably I didn't even get close to fully appreciating because I watched it early on, and then maybe I watched it again later, and I still remembered enough of it, even if it was just really vague things that, it didn't have the full impact on me. So you definitely can kind of think about it that way of like you can kind of ruin a show. I mean, there is something to that. And I did actually like, put off watching certain shows that I knew that everyone said was like really good until I got to a higher level so that that didn't happen. So I did do that with some shows. I think it's okay to do with some shows. But yeah, I mean, I guess for me personally, I never really kind of dwelled on it because when you think about like for me, learning Japanese provided me a lot more value than any one given anime would. So for me, it was like it was a good price to maybe sacrifice some shows to get fluent in Japanese.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Henry is asking, I am somewhere around the stage 2C to stage 3. Considering my main immersion, other than slice of life, is gaming content, what should I keep in mind if I find natives to play games with? Many small live streamers are open to this. Things to pay attention to, I think it would be feasible to just be a fly on the wall where I can output sparingly until I feel comfortable and the benefits would be worth it.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I would recommend. What stage did they say they're in?
Between 2C and 3.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, if you're new to it, I would definitely probably not try to speak that much and just try to be in the social situation and then start speaking slowly as you get more comfortable.
Though we do have part of the guide that says you should just start speaking at 3A just to like get into the habit of it.
But I mean, if you're like if you're joining if you've never even like talked to a native speaker before or you've never played a game with native speaker before, then you know, you have to kind of like learn how to read the atmosphere and like learn the culture of that game environment, right? Especially
Mhm.
if you're a foreigner. You don't want to just go in there, have no idea what the culture is and be like blabbering broken language and then just have them kick you out or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. He does note that his primary immersion content, other than slice of life, is gaming. So it sounds like he's been immersed in that for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like ready to speak, then yeah, there's no reason not to. But even for me, I mean, even in English, if I was going to go into something like a new environment with other people, I'd spend just like a little while, kind of, you know, figuring out what these specific group of people like, what their style is and how they communicate, because everyone's different, every specific environment. So
Cool. We have one more question queued up, so if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat, and we will get to them. So the next question comes from Never Forget to Be You. When will you guys make the translated guides? For example, for Japanese people trying to learn English. I have Japanese friends that want to try immersion learning. Yeah, so we have the guides translated into Portuguese, Spanish, and I think French. I need to double check that. And we have partial translations for about 6 other languages. So the translated versions are actually like already in progress. The hard part is converting our website to be able to support them and easily update and modify them. So as I mentioned in the presentation, the first one that we're going to get up there is Spanish, but once we have one up, it's much easier to get the others. And then it becomes a question of, do we have people in the community who are willing to do the translation? And if not, are we willing to pay someone to do it? And so for something like Japanese, we would likely want to find a partner who is native Japanese and learned English to a high level, to sort of represent that community and allow us to access that community. And when we find that person, we're very heavily incentivized to do the translation of the guide. So essentially trying to launch the partner and the guide for that language at the same time. And so that's how I am currently thinking about it. So it would depend on our, basically how this process develops as far as expanding into other language markets. So for Japanese specifically, there's no immediate time horizon just because nobody has volunteered to do it. Whereas the other languages, we have had volunteers who have raised their hand and said that they're willing to translate. So those will probably be coming out first. And yeah, that's about it. So I see Cloudy typing another question, but thank you for your question. Never Forget to Be You. And if anybody else on the call has questions, feel free to put it in. We'll wait, a minute or two. And if nobody does, then we can call this one early. But feel free to post anything and everything into the chat right now. By the way, Matt's in California right now. How's California, Matt?
It's pretty good. Definitely nicer weather than Portland.
Yeah. Are you in like a cool area, or is it just kind of a desolate?
It's San Luis Obispo.
San Luis Obispo, yeah.
So it's like pretty chill. There's not a lot of stuff here, I guess. There's a lot of beaches and stuff, but yeah, I mean, I've been mostly hanging out with my friend. We haven't been going that many places, so.
Got it.
But yeah, I should be heading back soon.
Nice. Cool. Another question from Schweiner. What do you think about breaks? Did you ever take a break and come back stronger to a TL? I saw some claims about the brain continuing to make connections even in periods without active study.
Like, one sec. There's like a plane outside and it making it really hard to hear.
Okay.
This house is right next to an airport, so this happens a couple times a day.
Yeah.
Kind of unfortunate. But okay, read the second half of that question again.
I saw some claims about the brain continuing to make connections even in periods without active study. So would you support taking a break from your TL to give your brain a rest?
I personally wouldn't. If it's solely for the purpose of like getting better at the language, I don't really believe that's a thing. There's other reasons to take a break, like maybe you're just kind of on the brink of burnout and you just like psychologically need to give yourself a break. Sometimes that can be good to kind of just refresh yourself and come back to it with a new attitude. But in terms of just pure language learning gains, yeah, I think it's true that your brain continues to make new connections even when you stop immersing for a period of time. But the thing is, if you keep immersing, your brain's also going to make all of those connections plus more, right? It's not like your brain is making it's not like there's some magic that only happens when you're not immersing. whatever benefits that you would have gotten by taking a break from a pure immersion perspective, you're going to get those while you're continuing to immerse, but more, if that makes sense, you know?
Um, I will say I have personally experienced the take a break, come back, understand way more. But I think it's a matter of ratio. It's not like, immerse for a day, take a break for a day. It's like, no, immerse for a month, take a break for a day or two. Um,
But I
or,
mean,
immerse.
I've experienced that same thing as well. Of like, you take a break, come back, and you feel better. But if you would have been immersing that whole time, do you really think that you wouldn't have had that benefit? I think just what happens is when you're constantly immersing, your improvement is more incremental, so you just don't notice it as much.
I think in this case, it's more a matter of we all need breaks. Like we all need off seasons. That's one of the most fundamental aspects of, you know, sports training and, high performance CEOs or high performance anybody. Like rest periods are like key to improvement. And so I do think that would also apply in this case because you are doing such a huge amount of brain development that sometimes just, 8 hours of sleep at night is not enough to give your brain enough time to actually recover. Um, and I
Yeah,
think
that makes sense.
you mentioned it in terms of burnout, and I do think that's actually a important feature of this. It's not so much that like uh, you like the break itself necessarily improves your language ability, but your brain just needs more rest in order to be ready to get back into immersion, pay full attention to it, and really process it as well as possible. And I imagine that the further on you get, the less that is needed. Um, but yeah, I think just in general, giving your brain a break occasionally is just a good thing, no matter what you're learning.
Yeah, like maybe taking 1 week off every 3 months or something. Maybe that would be good. But I mean, I've heard people talk about like taking one whole day off of immersion every week, and at that point, I think, I mean, there might be other reasons to do that, but if you're just trying to optimize your language learning speed, then I don't think I think that's too much.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In my personal experience, like I've made enormous progress by going like multiple weeks in a row, but then at a certain point, like sometimes my brain just gets too fried. I needed a little
Hmm.
bit of a longer break. So maybe like a weekend per month, something like that.
Hmm.
Cool. Thanks for the question. Um, Cloudy is asking, the JP1K is designed to facilitate an immersion baseline understanding, with more immersion being beneficial. If someone only has a small amount of time per day and only does 5 cards per day, do you think they can expect to get over the kanji fluency hump in a reasonable amount of time, or would you recommend, in this case, supplementing with a small amount of deliberate kanji study?
I mean, this is an empirical question more than anything, right? What's the minimum amount of time? The minimum amount of time per day uh, that you can spend total and like get over the kanji learning hump. But I mean, the way I would think about it is that let's just say that a half an hour is like the minimum, right? So maybe if you spend half hour a day and you know, 20 minutes of that is JP1K and 10 minutes is active immersion. And then you also have, let's say, an hour of passive listening. I would imagine that that would be enough to get over the hump. So that would mean that people who have less than a half an hour wouldn't be able to get over the hump. So maybe people who only have 20 minutes a day total of active time can't get over the hump. Well, in that case, if you're like, well, you only have 20 minutes a day total, should you do active kanji study? Well, in that case, you're like you're spreading the entire language learning process out like unreasonably thin because doing actual active kanji study when you only have 20 minutes a day total, that means it's going to take you, you know, months just to get through the kanji part, and then you're like at ready to start learning words. It's just like at that point, the whole learning process is going to take so long. You're like never going to get there anyway. So I think it's more of an issue of like realistically, if you want to learn Japanese, then you have to be able to have like an hour. You know, I mean, an hour a day is like the bare minimum, right? We've talked about this. So if you don't even have the bare minimum, then it's like learning Japanese isn't really a realistic pursuit in the first place. That's kind of just the reality of it. And on the other hand, if you do have an hour a day, then the JP1K should be no problem.
Cool. Thanks for the question. I see Henry writing, but in the meantime, oh, never mind. Okay. Anybody else have any last minute questions that you want to ask while we're here? If so, start typing and I'll see it. And otherwise, we can call this one done. All right. I think that is the end of our November live stream. Thank you, everybody, for attending. For those of you in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. Hope you have a great time with food and family and football, if you like that. And otherwise, we will see you next month.
Cool. Later, guys.
All right. Talk to you later.